Today is February the 25th, 2018. My name is Tanya Finchum. I'm with Oklahoma State University, and today I am in Oklahoma City to speak with George Stunkard. And this is part of our Oklahoma's Conservation Heritage Oral History Project. So thank you for coming. And along with me today is Stan Rice. He may chime in with a question or two. So let's begin with learning a little bit about you. When and where were you born?
Okay, I was born in 1939 in the month of June in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And my parents I grew up on a farm south of Tulsa. And it was a general farm. You know, cattle, hogs, crops, silage, and all the above, dogs, cats.
And what was a common chore that you were assigned?
The common chore was just chores, morning and evening chores, primarily. And of course, during the school months, I had to attend school, which I also attended in Tulsa Public Schools. You know, later in junior high and high school, we had to go clear downtown Tulsa. And our farm was about 2.5 miles outside of the city limits as I was growing up. By the time I graduated from high school, the city limits was in our backyard. So we had quite a growth in the city that eventually consumed the farm due to increase in taxes and whatnot. So, but my father loved cattle, and he was a polled Hereford breeder, and at our Tulsa location we didn't have a lot of pasture land. So he bought another farm, which is the one I reside on now, down in Wagner County, and it was like 240 acres originally, and then after I got out of school and moved in the area, we were able to acquire another 160 acres, and about half of it was cropland, the other half was pasture. But that's, you know, we actually ended up, my parents had to sell the farm because of the city encroachment, and part of it was in floodplain, so, you know, it wasn't a very high, extremely high valued property because of that. But anyway, that's when I graduated from OSU, I moved straight to the farm in Wagner County because the first of the year before graduation, my dad and I were able to lease an adjoining farm that was about a 400-acre place, and at a reasonable rate, and it had a house on it, so my wife and I moved into that house as I left Stillwater. So.
Well, then we should back up and say how did you come to go to OSU?
Okay, like I said, I attended high school, old school in Tulsa Central High School, and as I was nearing graduation, all of my good buddies decided they wanted to join the Marines. At that time, there was a 6-month program. You join, go through basic training, come back, do your other thing, go to work. Nothing was going on in the way of conflicts in the world at that time. So I went to my dad one night and said, you know what, I'd like to go with these guys. Good friends of mine. You know, we ran around together a lot, got into trouble a lot together. But anyway, he said, well, I'll tell you what. You may not remember, but he said about 20 years ago, I took out an insurance policy just to pay for your education. And he said, I would like for you to use it and then decide what you want to do. So after that little talk, I couldn't think about the Marines. I decided to go to school. And I actually had an older sister in school at OSU at this time, 3 years older than myself. So I packed up and went to OSU, got enrolled, and I'm glad that I followed my dad's advice on that one particular thing. So I majored in animal science, and to back up a little bit, the insurance money that my dad had paid over the years on my behalf, my dad was having a little financial problem himself about the time that matured. So he said, if you don't care, I'm going to keep half of this insurance money because I need to pay some bills. So I said, well, you bought it, keep it. And I said, keep it all if you want to. He said, no, I want you to get started, to pay your first room and board, and then some extra, you know. So that's what happened. And it didn't take long, though, for that money to disappear. So shortly after I got enrolled and started school, I decided I needed a part-time job. So I applied and got on at the beef cattle barn. So, and to back up some more, I actually got married in my freshman year of college, and to my high school sweetheart. And so we moved over there, and she graduated from high school the following year in '58. So we waited, and I moved home. We shared a room in my parents' house during that summer while I worked on the fields and baled hay and whatnot. And then we moved to Stillwater. So we got us a garage apartment there, and then that's when I went to work at the beef cattle barn to help make ends meet. So
let's get some dates on here. When did you graduate from high school?
Graduated in 1957.
So you started at OSU that fall, in
Yes,
57,
that fall.
and then graduated in
61.
61. Okay. And did you have a favorite professor while you were there?
I did have. His name was Dr. Bob Tadashek, and I also participated on the livestock judging team in college. And not only was Dr. Tadashek an animal science professor, he was also the coach of our judging team. And I actually stayed over there one summer and attended classes just to get him for a course that he taught during the summer months. Later, as I was like a junior, didn't have to go home and work that summer. I stayed in Stillwater and worked. So, yeah, he was a great man, great inspiration to me, and a great role model.
I think they've named an arena after him.
They have, yes.
Well, were you in 4-H or FFA when you were
I was in 4-H because of going to Tulsa schools, public schools. They had no FFA program. My mother was a 4-H leader. She began that when my older sister was old enough to join 4-H. And so we met at different locations, sometimes a school building, but most of the time, in the later years, in our home. And so she was very good, you know, as a leader. Also, we had some really good extension agents in the Tulsa County program. And so she continued to be a 4-H leader years after I was gone, you know, from school. And so yeah, we grew up in 4-H club, participated in the county shows, and I showed mostly registered heifers that we had raised. I think I showed a couple of barrows over the years, you know, trying to win all the prize money that was available, and but it was a wonderful experience.
Well, that took you to Stillwater for Roundup.
It did,
I
yes
guess,
ma'am.
for
Yeah,
4-H.
we went to Roundup several years in a row. And so that was my first experience of being on campus in a dormitory room. It was Roundup. Yes.
So is it just you and your sister, or are there other siblings?
I actually had 3 sisters. My dad always talked about, they're all older. I'm the youngest. My folks' children were born in 26 and 29 and 36 and 39. And somebody would ask him what the problem was. He said, we had depression in the middle of those years, so that's why the break. But anyway, I had 3 older sisters. And one of them continued to be a 4-H club leader until about 2 years ago.
Within the 4-H arena, was conservation a topic at that point?
It was, but you know, it wasn't really stressed a lot. The things I remember most about conservation and 4-H club work were maybe forestry field days, and where we go out and identify forest plants and trees and whatnot. That's about the only conservation that I recall in 4-H. Other than it was always present, you know. Erosion was a problem, always, it still is, and probably always will be. But yes, the field days type things is what I remember the most. To go out and it was usually done by the forestry folks.
Well, did your father and mother practice conservation on the farm?
Yes, all that was available at the time, and of course back then, you know, we grew a diversity of crops, and corn, alfalfa, wheat, to name a few, and always tilled the land. No board plowed the land, especially after alfalfa, because you couldn't kill it otherwise. And but as far as, yes, we did conservation practices, and I'll never forget, and I wasn't very old, but we lived in a floodplain. Had a notorious creek in South Tulsa called Joe Creek. And when we got a big rain, it would flood terribly. And it went on one side of our property. And I don't know, I was maybe 6 or 7 or 8 years old, but I remember Dad had bulldozers working down there, and he built a levee back away from that creek, but it was built to keep the overflow water from the creek from coming into the fields and flooding, and it would flood. Eventually, in that particular area, they channelized Joe Creek, and its concrete bottom and sides now wider than, you know, 3 times as wide as this room and deep, but it carries water to the Arkansas River from the hills in South Tulsa, but not the same creek we used to fish and swim in when I was a kid that our parents didn't know about, you know,
of course.
As far as the swimming.
Well, did they terrace, or that was probably after their, or before their time?
Our land was all flat land. It was bottom land. It didn't need terraces. We didn't farm any upland at all. It was all river bottom soil, and in both farms. So we just never had a need to build a terrace. Now, sometimes you had a bigger need to open a drainage way to drain water off a field that would want to stand there. You know, that was a bigger issue than slope and erosion for our properties.
Well, did you always have the goal of returning to the farm and being a farmer or rancher?
I always did.
Always.
And I'd say if a person has an idol in life, my father was that idol. We were best friends, constant companions, and just absolutely, he was the greatest man I ever met. And it was kind of his wish that I would have the opportunity to come back to the farm, and so it came true. But my dad passed away at a fairly young age. He was 66 years old, and I was just young, had just started moving. You know, I moved to the farm we had leased. I went and debt, bought cattle, and then discovered that, hey, I don't have any money coming in. I better go work somewhere. So I did. I took a job at a local manufacturing company and worked off the farm that way to kind of have a little household income, you know. And then when I would sell calves from the cattle I'd bought, I'd pay on the note and move right on. But times were kind of tough then in the 60s, and but we made it through it. And my wife later on went to work, but meanwhile we had 3 children. My wife and I had one son while we were still in Stillwater, and born born there in Stillwater, and then we had two daughters of our own when we moved to Coweta. But great kids, and
Were they active in 4-H?
They were.
They
yes. My son actually was active in FFA because he went to school in Coweta where they had a good FFA program. So he was not in 4-H. The girls were in 4-H club, and so I get tickled. My oldest daughter, in growing up, she was a girl that wanted nothing to do with the outside of the house. 180 degrees now. She doesn't want to be in the house. She's out gardening, growing butterfly weeds and hatching out butterflies in the house. She's a true conservationist, by education, and she loves it.
So chip off the old block too there then.
I guess.
So at what point did you get involved with the Wagner County Conservation District?
I was approached several years ago. I don't remember what year it was then. I think it was in the 60s.
I think I had 68, I want to think of
that sounds right. But there was a gentleman that we went to church with that was a board member on the Wagner County Board. And he was a good friend, and he became ill and was bedfast and couldn't attend board meetings any longer, but he asked the board if they would consider replacing him with me. And I didn't know that for a long time, but anyway, the district conservationist that was there came over and visited with me one day and asked if I would be willing to serve if I were appointed or elected, whichever the post was. And I said, I believe I would. And I tell people now that I kind of had an ulterior motive for wanting to serve on the Conservation District Board. And that was my dad and 3 other landowners in the area were interested in developing a watershed area, because the bottom land in the Caddyshan Bottom, which is a small bottom south of Broken Arrow, but in the Arkansas River bottom, was back in the WPA days had a drainage problem. And the reason for that is a lot of the sandy hills in the upland were being farmed in cotton and whatnot. And but the WPA had a project, and they developed a drainage district, and they cut drainage canals to drain the water that couldn't get off the bottomland fields into the river. Well, over the years, they weren't maintained, and finally they just were useless. And I know the land we had bought, if you planted a crop on it in the spring and got a lot of rain, by the time the water would get off of it, it was too late to plant something else. So we had a real problem in the area. So I agreed to do what I could as far as being on the Conservation Board to see if we could possibly get a watershed project in the area. And that happened. And we now have 5 upstream water control structures in the watershed, as well as about 5.5 miles of drainage channel. And it's been a lifesaver for that whole area. It has its own problems as well when you have floods and washouts and spillways and dams and whatnot, but we've been fortunate, and we did have one major issue, but it got addressed finally and corrected. But it's made that area so much more productive than it had ever been. So, but that was, I guess you'd call it an ulterior motive for me to serve on that board, because I remember once we had to go to the commission and ask for a priority to fund that project. And and it was granted. And I think one reason is because we were probably the smallest project in the state, as far as size was. You know, other projects that needed funding were huge, where ours was just a pittance. And so it was approved. Construction was started and completed in 1972 on all the 5 structures and channels, and so we're faced now with the maintenance of everything. And
45 years later, yeah.
45 years later, yeah. And as a rule, I think back then they decided that, you know, those would last about 50 years before they were silted in. And we're getting close to that number, but we've still got a lot of storage room in those sites. We haven't got the erosion that there was years ago when the upland fields were being farmed, and it's all in grass now. So
Combination of factors, I guess.
exactly, yeah.
Well, when you were doing this watershed, did you have any pushback from the other farmers in the area, landowners?
We had a little bit of skepticism. We had very few that just said, I want no part of it. We did have one landowner who had a potential site on his land. It would have been a smaller site, but we went to him to see if he would be willing to donate an easement. And he said no, not only would he not be willing to give an easement, he wanted no part of it on his land. Well, this particular guy was a realtor, and he could see development potential in that land, and he didn't want to site on it, so we scratched that one off and moved on. It was incidental to the project anyway. So.
And then that site probably benefited from the watershed?
It's actually, no, it was on the upper end, and it's still just like it was when he said no. It's being used as a hay meadow right now, and hasn't ever been developed yet. So.
Well, and I was reading something, you had something to do with lagoons?
Yes. In Wagner County, the district level, our means of raising income for years and years have been sprigging Bermuda grass. And I guess we were so good at it, it all got done. And we just, the last, few years, we had no grass to sprig. Nobody needed it. So we were looking for an alternative source of income to keep an employee working and everything. So it was suggested to us through the Commission, the Water Quality Division, that there could possibly be some grant money available to buy equipment to pump out dairy lagoons if we could find the need for that. So we started doing some investigation on that and found out that there was a need for that, and in northeastern Oklahoma. So we applied for the grant. It was awarded, and we covered about 16 counties in the area. And usually once a year was adequate to pump a dairy lagoon. And what we could do, not only pump it, we had the equipment to spread that with a traveling gun on the fields nearby. And so we continued with that project for several years until most of the dairies went out of business. And then we were stuck with equipment that we really didn't need. So we actually found a need for it within state government, and let them take the equipment, and no money was exchanged. It was just helping another agency that needed the work. They had their own dairy, and so that worked out fine for us.
Well, how many were on the board with you, in Wagner?
Myself and 4 others, a 5-member board. And we had, over the years, some associate members. Don't have any right now, but we've still got a chairman and 4 board members on every board in the state.
Are you appointed or elected for life?
I am
an
appointed director now. I think I was elected director for several years and then got switched over to the appointed side. and maybe they'll appoint somebody to replace me. It's okay.
Well, in that position, did you have to go to the Capitol very often?
Probably not in that position, but I served as an area director in the State Association of OACD, and then later as president of OACD. And that was when it was necessary to visit the legislature occasionally. And one thing that happened in OACD's dealings with the legislature up until this point, it would usually consist of the OACD president and the executive director of the commission, and I think this was true with other divisions of government as well, but they would team up and go to the Capitol and try to talk to lawmakers about our needs. And the year I think I was elected as president, the agency directors got a memo from the governor at that time saying they were not to be seen walking the halls of the Capitol unless it was by invitation only. And OACD until that point had never done any lobbying as such. We left that up to the president of the association and the executive director. Well, once that memo was issued, our other method, and we had done this for several years as I was associated with conservation, we would have a legislative reception in the evening after session at a hotel, and we would feed the legislators and have directors come over from all over the state to visit with them and see if we couldn't get some help on the legislative side. Well, after one of those sessions was over, I got kind of put out at that session, that meeting. Because those guys come over there, they go through the snack line, get them something to eat, and they congregate among themselves and to try to talk business with them. You had to wait for them to finish a bite or a drink, and anyway, I got kind of mad, I guess you'd say, and Ben had ridden with me, Ben Pollard, over to the hotel. So on our way back to the commission office, I said, Ben, I don't get these figures, but what did that cost the association for us to have that reception? And he said it was about $1,500. And I said, wow. I said, I think we can find a better way to do this. So I suggested that we ask some directors to come to Oklahoma City, maybe 6 or 7, get a hotel room on a Sunday night, have a couple of commission people come and meet with us and go over the legislative stuff that we would like to talk to the legislators about, and then move over there and be sitting in their office at 8 o'clock in the morning when they got to work. And Ben said, let's try it. He talked to Mason, and so we did that several times. And it was successful, other than they didn't get there at 8 o'clock. Sometimes they didn't get there at 9 or later. Anyway, we're still using that same program a little different. We'll just come in on a Monday morning now and meet in a meeting room at the Capitol and go over the issues that we want to visit with our legislators with. And, just call it Conservation Day at the Capitol. We do that 3 or 4 times a session. It's been real successful. And I was proud to have been a part of that transition, because the feeding them at a reception doesn't work. It just doesn't work.
Well, who was the governor that sent the memo?
Well, David Waters was the governor at that time. And he was fairly newly elected governor at that time, but he didn't think that any state agency head, director, should be in the Capitol unless they were invited by a legislator or a committee chair. So we got the message.
And you went around.
We went around, yes. But that was fun. We still have conservation day at the Capitol. We still come over there, I don't know, as many times as we can during the session to, you know, we're a very small agency competing for a pie that's getting smaller every year as far as the money's concerned. We gotta do what we can or get our share. And the watershed sites are, I mean, they're a wonderful asset to the state, but they're also, takes money to keep them up, to keep them working good.
And that's the job of the districts to do, individual
Primarily,
districts?
yes, job of the conservation districts, to keep them maintained. Now, we do have a crew from the commission that has equipment that can assist in the maintenance of these watershed sites. And they do. We've got several pieces of equipment, all the equipment that's necessary to keep them groomed and working properly. Yeah.
Well, at the district level, that's volunteer work, like when you were appointed?
Yes.
Volunteer.
It's volunteer.
So you have to, it's not really a job, it isn't, I guess, but.
Yeah, I guess it's.
A labor of love.
A labor of love, exactly. Yeah. You nailed it right there. Yeah. And I know the gentleman that approached my dad at the time they were talking about this, they were the same way. They were very much in favor of fixing the situation and making it correct. And all but one lived to see it happen. But that gentleman didn't live long enough to see it happen. And neither did my father. But I know what he would have said. John would have done.
So are you still in the ranch and farming business?
Yes. I've continued to live on the farm, and the farm we had leased years ago, it sold, so we didn't have it, but we moved over to the farm my father owned, and still live there, and still farming and running some cattle on it, and then back in the 80s were not very nice to production agriculture as far as finances is concerned, and I took a job working for a partnership, doing some custom farming for them, and that's kind of how I kept my head above water, I think, because you couldn't make any money with cattle or crops in the 80s. Seemed like it just was not to me, especially on a small scale. But this worked out all right, and I started growing some specialty crops, a little different than the regular commodity crops. I mean, we grew spinach for several years for a contracted canning company over in Arkansas. And then we grew purple hull peas and even white beans one year. We were trying everything, you know, but spinach was a good crop when it hit. It was a good money crop, and peas were comparable to soybeans, or maybe a little better.
Well, did those canning companies have certain regulations or whatever for you to follow?
Absolutely, yes. Yes.
From the conversation, well, yes, you get it. Conservation side, did they have?
They were real concerned, of course, with pesticide use. They gave us the prescription to use on in the way of pesticides because they were so scrutinized, you know, on the end product, human consumption. But as far as the conservation part of it, most of those crops were grown on pretty flat soil, not much erosion, just an aggravating crop because we had to harvest it mostly at night. And it took a big crew. But it's mechanically harvested. Semi would pull along the side of the cutter and put it in the truck, and you had stompers in there to stomp it down so they could get a heavy enough load on it to make a trip to Arkansas. And then it would be unloaded in the night and canned.
Well, why was it done at night, though?
It had to be cool enough, so when you packed it, it didn't sour or go, start molding and go back.
Yeah.
Temperature had to be fairly cool. Normally we can start 5:36 in the evening, but by the time you cut 2 or 3 loads, it was usually 2 in the morning. So,
Didn't have to worry about the dew setting?
no, didn't matter how wet it was, you could cut in the rain if you could stay in the field. A lot of times we would pull a cutter and the truck through the field with another tractor and keep going, as long as it didn't get mud in the crop, in the plants.
Mm.
Yeah, moisture was no problem.
Well, were there some times that you presented something and it just didn't work? Just didn't work out?
Oh, yeah. Many times. Even as far as making a presentation or something in the farming.
In the farming area.
In the farming.
Yeah.
I mentioned we tried some navy beans one year. We produced some, break-even cost in making money. I think it's too hot here for those beans. They grow those in Wisconsin and places like that. Mm-hmm. We just tried them here for the cannery as a small acreage, and then combined them with a combine. But it wasn't something I would do again. It just wasn't the right climate for that crop.
Does your property have minerals that you have to worry about, mineral rights under?
We own the mineral rights under our property, and half of it, I'd say. And actually, we have a gas well that we operate our house on. It's very dependable, but there's not any activity in that area anymore. Most of the gas that was produced was small amounts, so very little oil.
So Wagner County doesn't have to worry too much about reclamation of well sites?
We have had some done, but very little. I know there was one property that I still farm today that had a lot of old wells on it, and I think it was owned by Chevron, and they, I think, moved out of Oklahoma, but they came in and cleaned up everything. And some had been there since the teens and 20s. But they did a great job of reclamation on that old lease. Got rid of all that was there.
Well, who would check that, come back to see that they've done it? Someone at your level or at the state level?
No, I think that would be probably the Corporation Commission would do that.
Okay.
I don't think our district has ever been involved much in oil and gas reclamation. I think that's usually the Corporation Commission's responsibility.
Well, deciding to go from the county level to the state level association, did that change your role or anything like that? It
gave me an opportunity to do a lot of things I would never have had to do. In going to state and national meetings on behalf of the Conservation Commission or OECD, and those were experiences that were so beneficial to me that I can't even tell you how beneficial they were. And the people that had an opportunity to meet, grow to be friends with over those years are invaluable. Just, there's so many states I could go to and pick up a phone and call a friend and be a friend now, and that's because of my association in the Conservation Commission and the Conservation Districts. It's wonderful. A lot of times I'll ask people if they would be willing to serve on our Conservation Board when we have it open. And they say, well, I'm really too busy, or I've got more now that I can do. And I said, well, so do I. But I said, you ought to try it once. You'll be surprised, what you can do, whether you're too busy or not. And I used to tell people when I was serving as OECD president, I would go to a lot of functions all over the state. People would ask me, how can you stay gone from home so much? And this was in the 80s when times were tough. And I'd say, well, the think I lose less money when I'm away than I do when I'm at home, because I'm not spending it, you know, and I think there's something to that. But anyway, it is difficult to be away, you know, now, very much.
What kind of a time commitment was it? Once a week, once a month?
I'd say probably once a month.
Once a month.
Yeah. And I would try, when I was OAC president, to go visit other boards. And I highly recommend that to current presidents, because I didn't go to another board meeting that I didn't learn something at that meeting that I could take back to our own board. You know, I think we get in a rut of going to the same board meeting every month, and if we go to a different one, we might pick up something that's good, you know, so.
Well, things going on in different areas of the state would.
Exactly.
Geography's
Yeah.
different, everything's
Yeah.
really different.
Yeah, it's always something to learn.
Was your wife involved in aspects of this as well?
She's very much involved, yeah, she's been a partner in everything we do, and she's been active in the Women's Auxiliary for years, and she's here with me this weekend, or this week, so been very active and supportive.
Is the Women's Auxiliary still up and running? I mean, is it operating?
Yes. Yeah, they usually have an agenda of their own at this meeting that they will take off and do, or whether they do it here at the hotel or go somewhere. They have their own agenda.
Well, I want to back up and ask, when was the first tractor? Do you remember driving your tractor for the first time?
Yes, I do. We had an M Farmall that my son still has. 42 model, I believe it is. 42 or 3. Anyway, yeah, that was the first tractor I ever drove. And then my dad acquired an H Farmall. It was a little handier, a little easier for a kid to operate. Wasn't quite as heavy, you know. And we started on both. And the H is junk, but I still got it.
How old were you when you drove?
Well, I would say I was probably 6, 7. Start out slow, you know, first gear, raking hay, just barely moving, you know. And Dad ride around a few rounds with me till he felt like I knew what I could do, couldn't do. But started slow like that.
Did your sisters have the same opportunity?
They had the opportunity, but they didn't want it. Now one of the oldest sisters, she did a little farm work, but the other two, they didn't do much farm work. They had other things going.
Well, did they have chickens? Did your parents have chickens?
We had chickens, Duroc hogs, and we hand milked about 10 cows. And growing up, my mother had a regular milk route. And she would strain that milk and bottle it in 1 gallon jugs, wide mouth jugs. I think I've still got one of those left. But, and load them in the car and head toward Brookside, and had regular customers that this was their day to get a gallon of milk, and so I went on that trip several times. On the hogs, my dad had about 10 sows, the Duroc sows, and a boar about this big, meaner than a snake. But he had a little building at the end of the farrowing barn, and coal stove in it, and he would sleep down there during farrowing season, so he'd be there when those pigs, sows had pigs. I'll never forget, one year, we had 2 sows, each had 8 pigs, live pigs, and two of the sows died. So we had 16 baby pigs, day-old pigs, when you do it, you know. And my dad called our family doctor and said, "Can you come up with some kind of a milk that we can feed these baby pigs?" And so he did. He came up with a recipe, and we took a V-trough, you know, made holes in it, and got baby bottles, and we raised those 16 pigs. Baby bottles, never forget that.
That's a visual image you'd like to see.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Had to put them in there where the coal stove was, so it was warm, you know, because the cow couldn't keep them warm, so. Yeah, those are, you know, childhood experiences that I'll never forget. And my kids never had the opportunity to do anything like that. But, poor folks have poor ways, I guess.
In some ways, yeah. Well, did they hand milk, or did they have electric milkers by that time?
No, we milked by hand.
By hand,
And usually my grandmother, she lived there on the farm with us, and she was a milker. And then another lady that later came and lived in my grandmother's house after my grandmother moved out, she was a milker. And her husband worked with my dad as a farmhand. And my dad and I would milk as well. But it was a little hard to get the milking done before school, so I didn't do much morning milking. But afternoon was my time. And we would always fill a silo as well and feed the cattle, you know. And I'll never forget one incident that happened on our farm was when I was about high school, sophomore maybe, freshman, sophomore, something like that. My job was to go out in the morning and throw the silage, that upright silo, throw it out to a buggy down below, fill that buggy so later my dad could take it out and feed it. And I was up there one morning about daylight or just after daylight, working that silage out the hole so we'd go down the chute and land in that wagon, and I heard somebody yelling. So I crawled up to the top of the ladder, and it was my grandmother. And she was yelling at me. She said, "You get down out of there right now." Well, my grandmother had never spoken to me in that tone of voice in her life. So I didn't know what had happened. So I climbed down, walked over there where she was. I said, "What's the matter?" She said, "Turn around and look at that silo." I turned around, that silo had done this in the night. And I was up in the top of it. And it just rotted out and buckled. And you know that thing never fell over. We was afraid to get in it after that. But finally, my dad got some help and got some cable and went around the top of that silo and anchored it to the barn that was sitting right next to it. And we ended up emptying that thing, and it sat there empty for several years, and it never did fall over until we pulled it over when we sold the property. So that's that story.
Well, did you do different types of tillage, like no-till or ridge till?
Growing up, no. We did a disc, a harrow, plow, disc, and harrow like every other farmer did, you know. And you know, after I've been involved in agriculture, I'm sold on no-till, have done no-till for several years. And I think for us, it was a necessity. They had, no-till was up in the Corn Belt years before it came to us. I had to do it because of the economics of it. We couldn't afford to use all that fuel working ground when it wasn't necessary. So I did buy no-till equipment, and I've got land now that's been in production no-till for several years. And I'm just now getting started growing cover crops. I hadn't done that till this year, and I've got some in cover crops and some not, that I will end up planting in soybeans. And I'll either destroy the cover crop with chemically, or I'll let it mature itself and plant soybeans in that ground. And hope to do a lot more this next year. I also work off the farm at a full-time job, and it's kind of hard for me to get everything done in my spare time. But right now the nursery is, you know, kind of my bread and butter, so to speak.
Trees and plants,
Trees
or
and
mostly
plants,
trees?
yes, yeah. Annuals, perennials, you name it, and all of the above.
Well, does conservation come into that job? I would think a
It
little
does,
bit. A little bit.
it sure does, yeah, and we are growing trees as well, and shrubs on the property. And just started that this last fall, growing back to growing our own product. We did that originally when I went to work at the nursery, and then another company was doing the growing on our behalf, and they didn't want to come to that location anymore, so they quit, and we harvested all the trees and put it back in the row crops. So we have started last spring of planting the nursery property back in trees and shrubs for our own sale.
Christmas trees?
Have some that'll work, but as a real, not just for.
That's a whole different type
Whole
of
different
farm,
type, yeah,
isn't
yeah,
it?
is,
Yes.
yeah. And we don't want to compete with the people that are doing that. So.
Well, on your farm, well, I don't guess you have to worry about shelter belts, because that would be more in the panhandle.
We really
than
don't.
here.
We get wind, but nothing like they do out west. And so, you know, there's some natural ones there. If you leave a fence intact for 40 years, it becomes a shelter belt. We've got some of that in our area.
Red cedars taking over?
Well, not so much in spots, but most of these are just big old trees, oaks and cottonwoods and sycamore and elm and, you know, all those trees that just grow up in a fence row and they're still there. But not many of them are taken out.
So if you do this as your day job, then you'd farm after 5?
Pretty much, and weekends. Sometimes I have weekends off, and sometimes I'll just take off. I've got work to do, and I've got pretty good rapport with the owner and the company, and I actually do some farming for them as well, just on a custom basis. And, so.
Well, what are you currently doing with the conservation group? I mean, what are you involved with?
Here at this state meeting, I'm representing our board, and I'm the only board member that was able to come this time. And usually our district secretary or our district manager is able to attend, but she was going to go on a trip with her husband to Aruba on Tuesday, so she declined to come over for this meeting. And then she called me yesterday. She'd been to urgent care and she's down with the flu. So I'm hoping she gets well enough to make that trip. But she said they went ahead and gave her and her husband a shot, so he might not come down with it. But hopefully everything will work out for him.
Well, what's the topic of the day? What's the issue? Current issues.
I think here at this meeting, I think it's going to be funding. And I'll never forget the year I went on the commission. The first vote I had to do, and this was back in, what was it, year 92, I think, maybe.
Something like that, yeah.
My first vote as a commissioner was to cut allocations to districts by $2,000 a year. We only got 3 to start with. So I went home. The next day, I think I got one phone call from the district. Maybe it was a few days after that. So when they got word of it, man, I wasn't very popular, nor was any other commissioner. But it worked out. It got reinstated a little bit later, and nobody had to have their phones turned off, I don't think, or stop their trash service or the electric bill. But there were threats of that. So we're going to turn our phones off, you know. But that was just, I'll never forget, that was my first vote. Cut the allocations to districts.
When you were on the commission for 5 years?
I was on for 5, and then I was reappointed for another 5. So I served actually 2 5-year terms on the commission, and replaced Sandra Drummond, who was was my predecessor on it in Area 3, and now Scotty Harriman is my successor from Area 3. So.
Well, those 10 years that you were on, what were some of the topics or hot issues during that period?
Oh, golly, there were so many. One I remember was, and we had some folks come to a commission meeting in protest of the commissioner, the Conservation Commissioner of the state was supplementing the freight for hauling chicken litter from eastern Oklahoma to western Oklahoma. It's a good fertilizer. But somehow there was an issue with you're paying these truckers to, I can't remember what the real issue was on this why, but they were not happy with conservation supplementing the truckers for moving litter to the west level. Of course, the whole thing was there's an abundance of it over here. Let's move it over here, and where they need it more, you know, so they don't over-apply in eastern Oklahoma. So I don't remember exactly. They made a good point, I thought, at that commission meeting, and we promised them we would study the situation and get back with them, which I know that we did. I can't remember the outcome of it now, but they had a point that our supplementing that freight was not fair to the buyers or the sellers. And so that was one issue I recall. Most of the time, commission meetings were pretty general. Always had business to conduct, you know. Never had too many conflicts, and if we did, it was pretty much financial. Are you giving one district a larger allocation than another, and why? And so it was always a balancing act to keep all the districts on a level playing field. And another big thing when I was president was it was suggested by some legislators that conservation, we got too many conservation districts. At that time, we had 89 in the state. We've only got 77 counties. We had one or two counties with 3 conservation districts. And those districts received the same amount of allocation from the state as one district in a county. So that was something we worked on, trying to encourage those multi-district counties to consider consolidation. And the first meeting we went to, I think we almost had a riot in that. It wasn't a very popular subject. And but you know, over time, we've now had some districts voluntarily do that, and I think more are planning to. And you know, with the a lot of those different districts were originally because of geographic reasons. Maybe there's mountains here on one side, and but with social media now and communication so easy, we've had some cooperative coming together of districts, and I think we'll probably see more of it.
So how many are there now?
Do you remember, Stan, how many districts we have now? How many total we have now? I think it may be 87, but 86 or 87. I
Still
think.
more than the county.
Yeah. There's still one county with 3 districts in it. And, yeah. So, but basically, most others are on county boundaries. Originally, I know my district used to be 2 counties, Tulsa and Wagner, years before my time, because it was called the Arkansas Valley Conservation District. It was 2 counties.
you have any questions you want?
I would like, George, go back. When you mentioned that you went into the sprigging business, the district started.
Yes,
What was the reason? Why did the farmers decide they wanted grass rather than cropping?
a lot of the ground that was being cropped should never have been cropped. I've got an aerial photo of a little area on my farm, and you can see the plow furrows in it, and it's like this.
Yeah.
And it goes down into a creek bed, and they were farming that in cotton. Back this aerial photo was in 1945. I didn't even know they took aerial photos that year. Did you?
41 was the earliest ones I saw.
Really? Well, this was in 45, I believe.
Yeah.
And
The Army flew a lot of photos in 41.
yeah, and these, you know, this is my pasture, and it's got trees scattered in it, and those plow furrows, you can just see them as clear as they.
So it was economic rather than
Yeah,
program?
it was just economics. You know, the land should never have been farmed anyway.
Right.
It was upland, highly erosive, sandy soil, and that's why our drainage ditches would all plug up. That sand would just wash and fill them up, and New York minute. And but it was.
Was there a program to help these farmers to do that?
I think there may have been through
Small incentive?
through ASCS. Not probably what was, or what is now Farm Service.
Yeah.
I think there may have been some cost share programs for sprigging grass.
Well, were these farmed out fields, when they went to Bermuda grass, did they put them in for production, or did they just to cover them up? Was there a...
I think they put them in for production.
So there was management of that?
More livestock oriented rather than cropping. And yeah, you know, Bermuda grass, wonderful crop when it started being planted in.
Or do you see any transitions from that back into cropland? Do you see any going back the other way?
Very little. There could be some, but if it is, it's you know, another business that's big in our area is sod farms.
Yeah.
And I know of a few of those that have reverted back to cropland. But sod is still a big business as well.
Well, did you ever hear any thought of sequestration, carbon sequestration on any of this, any of the activities like tree planting or grass planting or anything? Have you ever heard that out there, and is it common in a coffee shop?
It's not right now, but I think you're ahead of your time. I think you'll hear more about that down the road. And it's just like why people are planting cover crops.
Yes.
You know that's carbon sequestration, and it's just now starting to. I'm one of the late comers. I should have been doing this a few years ago, but you know, I'm going to plant everything in cover this next year if I'm able at all.
What do you use for cover?
Well, this year I planted a little bit of triticale and with radishes and turnips in it. I planted some Elbon rye, and I think I planted just some wheat and ryegrass.
No clovers or legume?
Not yet. Actually, some of this I planted in an older alfalfa stand that was about gone. So that's the only one that's got legume in it right now.
Yeah. Well, do you see, obviously you see a lessening of nematodes, but what about the soil health at some depth? Do you see that those cover crops actually penetrating, or?
They are, yes. Yeah, last year I did this one small acreage, and then we did it again this last fall. And yeah, I had carrots, you know, I've got bottle go down, and I still haven't disturbed the soil. And And I've grazed it this winter with some yearlings but I plan to go back with that same, and I may put some more legumes in there, but I'll put soybeans back in that for harvest crop this time.
Well, do you see the general education of the people more knowledgeable about conservation and their environment, so to speak? I mean, did the universities do a good job of putting people back out there with the know-how to make things operate?
I think they have. I really believe that the university and extension and then also conservation districts have pretty much gotten the word out. And I have been to a few field days this past year, just on cover crops and whatnot, and that's the most interesting technology. And it's that I've seen in farming in years, along with no-till, but the cover crops, and I think we're just on the verge of an explosion and learning new techniques.
What was the ages of the people that come to the field days?
It wasn't just geezers like me, there was some young folks there, a lot of them.
A lot of them.
Yeah, a lot of them. And so it's good turnouts too. A lot of people there.
Yeah,
And,
that's the question.
So,
They didn't just come for the hot dogs.
no, they came to learn something, and we all learned something.
What about the urban people that buy that 40-acre dream farm out there? Do you see something there that they need more education, or is it lacking, or is it a smooth transition?
Well, both, I'd think, but most of them that come out there and buy that 40 acres or 10 acres and think, well, I can run 10 cows on this and have plenty of grass left over, that's the problem, you know.
Yeah.
3 horses on an acre.
Yeah.
And no supplemental feed, but we have to keep educating those folks.
There's a lot more home gardeners these days.
That's right,
too.
yeah.
They're looking for things that they can do safely to, increase their products. and
Exactly,
things, so
yeah.
Conservation comes in there a little bit too.
I think a little of my conservation has rubbed off on my older daughter because she is a gardener. And she's the one that never wanted out of the house as a teenager, but she is a gardener. And in charge of a church garden as well as her own. Doing a great job of it.
Well, machinery's gotten bigger, more
It
expensive.
has, very much so, yeah.
But it's air conditioned too, and it used not to be.
I noticed on this list of things, where it was. Oh, the dumbest thing or
Yeah.
worst experience on the farm. Okay. One Sunday morning, I was had been spraying some soybeans. Still have the tractor hooked up, sprayer on it, some chemical in it. Before church, I told Phyllis, I said, I'm gonna go down there and get this sprayed out, and then I'll come up and get ready for church. That old tractor pretty much worn out, but I had to take a cover off and squirt ether in the breather, and then go up in front of the rear wheel and get next to the engine and push the starter button on the other side. And this was just routine. I'd done it that way for years, you know.
806?
706.
706, all right.
And the old tractor, I hit that starter and that thing started, and then when it picked up the hydraulic pressure, it jumped and it knocked me under. And all I could think of was keep my arms and legs out from under those wheels, you know. And in the process, something caught me and rolled me into like the tightest somersault I had ever been in. And I was laying back on the ground and looked, and the tractor was headed for the trees at 5 miles an hour. So I jumped up and ran and caught the tractor, and jumped back on it, and pulled it around and stopped it. And I thought, I'm going to just a little bit of spray. I ought to just go finish spraying this. But I had one shoulder that was killing me, and I thought, no, I'm not going to do it. So I killed it, climbed off, got in the truck, went up to the house, and I hadn't even noticed it, but something had skinned my head up here somewhere, and blood was just oozing down my cheek. And I walked in the house, and my wife turned white as a ghost. And she said, what happened to you? And, you know, I think I was in a little bit of shock, and I couldn't even answer. And finally, pretty soon said, well, I'm all right, but the tractor ran over. Well, she went into orbit then and started calling her kids. And said, get up here, we're going to take your dad to the emergency room and everything. Well, I said, you go where you want to, I'm going to go get in the shower. And because I knew nothing was broke. But that's the worst experience I ever had on a farm. Yeah. And it was so dumb to do that, because I looked at that gear shift. Yeah. It was in neutral, I thought. Yeah. And what I finally figured out caught me was that sprayer had a jack that was turned back that you put down and hook it. And I think that's what caught my clothes or something and turned me like that. But one of those, moments that you don't want to ever happen again. Mm. And I took that tractor and had it overhauled the next week. So I didn't have to start that way anymore. So.
Well, do you have a favorite season, time of year on the farm?
Well, I think spring is probably always a beautiful time. Everything's blooming and warming up and birds singing, and that's got to be my favorite time of year. It's been a great life, and I'm just happy that I've been able to stay around this long, and enjoy it, and hope to continue.
Well, over that time involved with all this with conservation too, is there a high point when it's something that just sticks out?
I think the high point was probably when I was awarded the Hall of Fame award as doing a good job, probably. But I've had a lot of highs in this business. I'm just sorry that the people that don't get involved make that choice because they're missing something. This conservation group is a family, and I feel like if I would buy out, I would be divorcing my whole family. It's just, and a guy told me one time, a legislator told me at one time, he said, there is more talent in the Conservation Commission agency than any other agency in the state. And I think he was right. He had it pegged. We have great people over there ever since I've been involved in it. Not as many of them now because of cuts, but talent-wise, it's still there.
Seem to have a large knowledge base too.
Across,
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, then, in your lifetime doing farming and things, what's been the biggest invention or innovation that's come about?
I think it's come about just in the last couple of years, and that's the cover crop soil health initiative. You know, it's mind-boggling how quick that works. And, you know, I've got people, one guy I work for, that he doesn't believe in no-till. And I've been doing it on his own land now for 6 or 7 years in a row. Said, I want you to work that ground up this year, make a seed bed and plant it like it's supposed to be. I said, I'll do it. You're the one paying for it, but you're making a mistake. Well, he's one that I can't convince. He's going to have to hear it from somebody else or see it from somewhere else. But anyway, it's the soil health is just so involved and so dramatic that it's side by side with, you know, healthy soil and poor soil, no comparison.
A lot of demonstrations.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
George, you mentioned the environmental opportunities we have of being out there and listening to birds and everything. You know, one thing, that smell of fresh tilled soil,
Mm-hmm.
you know what that smell is?
Mm-hmm.
It's carbon.
Yep.
There's carbon dioxide coming off.
Going off.
That is addictive.
Well, I'm sure it is.
It is.
You know, yeah.
If that's your life, if you've been out there and every time you farm, you smell that, that's like.
You're right.
It
I've
has,
smelled it myself, and it smells good. But it's not the answer.
not the answer.
Yeah. Part of the problem.
What advice would you give newcomers?
Newcomers to conservation, get involved.
Get involved.
Get busy. Look over the fence on your neighbor and beyond, and then look at your own situation as well. But it's just been such a learning process for me over 50 years or however long it's been. It's great. I would encourage anybody to get involved in it.
Well, anything else you want to add before I ask my last question?
Well, you're probably tired of listening to me.
No, you're doing great. There may be something I don't know to ask, so
Well,
this is your opportunity to tell me something I don't know, which is, that's a big, we talked about erosion and tillage and dams and watersheds and.
I think I'm probably just ready for your last questions.
Well, that's the one, when history's written about you, what do you want it to say?
Oh.
How do you want to be remembered?
I guess just that I was a player in the field. I didn't do anything spectacular or don't intend to, but I wanted to be a cooperator and be a participant in everything that's good for the environment and good for future generations. And they're the ones that are going to have to deal with the problems that we create.
Sounds good to me.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much for speaking with us this afternoon. It's
Well,
been great.
I enjoyed it.